Ways to improve our human relations, our love of neighbor. Duval says that these verses are a miscellaneous collection of basic virtues and vices with little underlying coherence. So it's just a list of things, okay? You know, chastity is good, but hatred, jealousy, quarreling, arrogance are not. And then you've got the reverence for old and young, praying for our enemies and trying to keep the peace. And these are all instruments of survival in community life. So it's just kind of a group of things put together here. Verse 64 is the only place in the rule where Benedict mentions chastity. Casey says that Benedict is very familiar with the conferences and institutes of John Cassian and considers it to be a good instruction on chastity. And that conference in there, he goes into quite length about chastity, what it should be and what it shouldn't be. And Benedict knew that, and he doesn't feel any need to elaborate it on it in the rule. I'm sure it was read to the monks. They had to read it if they couldn't read it. It was read to them. They studied it. They prayed with it. They did like. He just didn't see any need to put it in the rule because that was just kind of like, well, that's just, you know, it's just part of it. So he didn't. That's the only time he mentions chastity in the rule. Duval says that in these verses, she found that treasure chastity is sort of the keynote, sets the keynote. It's asking us to respect and revere others. It is asking for a sense of restraint by which we hold ourselves back from intruding ourselves on others. And she says that what so often lies behind quarreling is the desire to impose ourselves and our ideas and our demands on other people. Sounds a little bit like what Anita was talking about with the laughter, wasn't it? We were putting ourselves out there and making fun of others so to make ourselves better. Okay? Along with this, Casey says that the only way to avoid quarreling is to develop a culture of listening to others with profound respect. We're not going to be quarreling if we're really listening. What are they really trying to say? You know, even if they're yelling at you, what are they really trying to say? Okay, encouraging the expression of different points of view is necessary and a great way to come to a good level of common agreement. There are other ways of looking at it. I sometimes find, oh, I didn't think about doing that, and somebody else is very adamant about doing it. You know, so we learn by listening to each other. And again, Benedict says, listen with the ear of your heart. That's the first word of the rule. In chapter 3, Benedict also speaks of summoning the community for counsel. The community members are to express their opinions with all humility. They're not to be putting other people down because of, you know, they disagree with them. They're to do it in a humble way. He also recognizes that the Spirit often reveals to the younger what is better. It doesn't mean that the oldest ones among us know the best way. Sometimes the younger folks have, and oftentimes the younger folks have good ideas and ways to do things. So that's one way of dealing with the quarreling and the trying to, you know, listen to each other. Respectfully listening. Now, regarding jealousy and envy, Casey says that they stem from regarding others as rivals and adversaries. If we see other people as our rival or we're constantly fighting with them, it's going to lead to some jealousy and envy. Because of jealousy and envy, we do not wish to share with them the good things that we possess. And we resent the fact that they possess good things and qualities that we want. So that underlying desire there with the jealousy and the envy. We become suspicious and we desire to get an advantage for ourselves. The danger in all of this is that jealousy and envy tends to spread to those we are having problems with. Jealousy and envy, it kind of spreads to other people as well. And as a result, this form of individualism will continue to grow instead of belonging to a community with a common ownership of goods and unity of heart and mind. We live in a narcissistic world in which the connection to other people is broken. Everybody wants it for themselves. It's all me. It's all about me. We become more concerned about ourselves and our needs than the needs of others. In verses 69 to 71, I found it interesting that these verses do not appear in the rule of the master. Anita mentioned that a while ago. Because often, many parts of the rule, Benedict copied word for word from the master, but some of these he left out. He deleted the sections that he did not want and added others that he thought were important. In the rule of the master, the monks were encouraged to work hard at being the best monk they could be. Okay? But in the eyes of the abbot. Be the best monk you could be in the eyes of the abbot, because the abbot was the one who chose the next abbot. So there was no discernment or election by the community. The abbot chose, and so they were constantly vying with each other to be the high, in the best eyes of the abbot. I'm the highest one. I'm the best. So they were constantly. That's the way it went in the rule of the master. Benedict didn't want that. The monks, they were encouraged to win the abbot's favor. Sounds like fuel for arrogance, competition, and lack of respect for others and the old and the young, doesn't it? They're just out for themselves. That's why he felt it necessary to add this part. He did not want pride or relation to the characteristics of the monk in his monastery. And also from the writings of Cassian, Benedict believed that Christ-like humility is the most important element of lifelong perseverance in the monastic life. The humility, not always being the top dog or being the best, being humility, having respect for others. Definitely rule out arrogance and elation and lack of respect. Now, regarding respect of elders and love of juniors in verses 70 to 71, Benedict acknowledges that we live in a community of unequals. Not everybody is equal in this community. For Benedict, seniority is determined by the day and the hour when they entered. So, unless for a good reason the abbot should change it. But in those times there were many people of varied backgrounds, talents, abilities. You had nobles and people of higher class, and you had the poor class and people in the middle, but that didn't make any difference. It was when you enter the community, that's the date of your rank in the community. That kind of put that caste system or the class system, kind of took care of that. And young or old, it is important that each member of the community recognizes and celebrates the unique contributions of others make to the common life and to the attainment of the monastic ideal. And this refers back to that respect of others we've been talking about. Another verse that is not in the rule of the master is verse 72. In this verse, also in verse 73, Benedict brings to our attention the importance of reconciliation. We are to not only forgive others, but we are to pray for them out of love for Christ. We can find Christ not only in our friends, but also in our enemies. Well, that's a tall order, isn't it? Find Christ in your enemy, or the one you're having the problem with, And that was Benedict for him, that Christ come in the poor and the guests and in the enemies as well, and in the people that you live with. Where can you find Christ in all? Now, Christ might be a little bitty tiny place in there, but Christ is there. Christ and God made all of us, right? So Casey says that reconciliation is impossible as long as we regard ourselves as the sole injured party. I'm the only one hurting here, The other person has been injured in some way too. That's why they're fighting back, I would suppose. So kind of to see where the other person is coming from. Sometimes the path to reconciliation is cleared by our being willing to be the first, humbly and sincerely, to ask for pardon and forgiveness. Casey quotes Sheila Cassidy. She says that However much we have been wronged, however justified our hatred, if we cherish it, it will poison us. The more we dwell on that hatred, or how much we've been wronged, it poisons us. We just kind of go deeper and deeper into that. And our hearts become bitter, our vision is clouded, and our love will wither away. Hatred is a devil to be cast out, and we must pray for the power to forgive. For it is in forgiving our enemies that we are healed. And I'm sure Benedict never read those words, but I'm sure he would agree with them, that poison that comes in from the hating and the quarreling. In verse 73, Benedict encourages us to make peace before sunset. I always wondered about that, but he says that if we allow a grievance to fester after sunset, it interferes with our sleep, doesn't it? You can lay there and go over it and over and rehash the whole thing all night long. Then this lack of sleep will then exaggerate our feelings of being wronged and extend the grievance from one single incident to include a whole wide range of other hurtful situations. We just start bringing in everything else that they did or may have not done or whatever. Yeah, that seems so true. And the more we think about whatever happened, we think more and more things that hurt us. It just keeps snowballing. Our emotions, they can get us carried away. Also, if we look closely, they may even come from some deeper or more hidden source. That's getting into a little therapy there or something, but that's something we might have to look at too. Now, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Jesus promises happiness to those who make peace. Peace will not happen of its own accord. It has to be created. You have to work at it. We must start to think differently and ask what we can do to resolve the matter peaceably and move toward reconciliation. That takes a lot of courage. But the more we do it, the more we're this humility, the more we're able to do that. And we must make peace by beginning with ourselves to do what we can to create peace with those with whom we have the problem. Sometimes I'm more mad at myself for what happened than I am at the other person, but it's hard to, so making that peace with oneself is just as important too. And now Anita's going to talk about the rest of it.
So we come to the end of the chapter. And Benedict concludes his list of tools by saying, never lose hope in God's mercy. He has listed 73 tools for the spiritual life. Some of them are positive and some of them are negative, but number 74 puts them all into perspective and into context. God's love, mercy, and forgiveness is ultimate. And if we can remember that, then we'll strive to keep the rest. And I find it rather interesting as I was looking back over this that, last year we didn't know there was going to be a year of mercy. And yet this verse, I think Pope Francis would go right with it. Never lose hope in God's mercy. When we fail, and we know we will, all we need to do is to remember that God is indeed merciful, forgiving, and loving. And then we can get back up and start again. The love and mercy of God are foundational for us as we practice the tools of the spiritual life. Because practice of these tools without a sense of God's love leads us simply to go through the motions. We're just talking about exterior actions and movements. So once again, it's God's love is primary for Benedict's message to us. Benedict tells us we're to use all of these tools throughout our life and return them to God on Judgment Day. then will receive the reward that is promised to all good and faithful servants. What's interesting, comparing this section to what the Rule of the Master says, is that Benedict leaves out a rather lengthy, as the Master can only be lengthy, he's very wordy, but Benedict leaves out a lengthy description of what exactly this heavenly reward is going to look like. Rather, Benedict simply says that the reward we receive is what the eye has not seen nor ear heard, but what God has prepared for those who love. And I think by doing that, what Benedict tells us is that the reward isn't what's important. It goes back to what Rose said it earlier, eternal life. That's the goal. The journey to our union with God in heaven, that is our ultimate goal, the ultimate reward. Casey notes that there are very few people who could claim to have practiced all the precepts given in this chapter. And so at the end, most of us are probably conscious of how much still needs to be done in order to bring our life into conformity with the gospel. So it's important that we realize that everything we do relies on God's grace. St. Bernard of Clairvaux advised his monks, "Turn your foot aside from troubled and anxious recalling of your ways, and escape to make an easier journey by the serene remembering of the good things which God has done. In this way, instead of becoming upset by thinking about yourself, you will catch your breath by looking upon God." I like that image. You will catch your breath by looking upon God. In the end, what is needed is perseverance and stability. And as Benedict says, the workshop for the use of all these tools is the monastery and the stability of the community. We use the tools in daily life, in our interactions with one another. And what matters most is that we don't attempt to run away from our lives, especially when times and circumstances become difficult. Instead, we stay put. Wherever we are, wherever life happens to find us, we stay put, we persevere in our commitments, and we trust God to see us through. One of the Desert Fathers said, "A monk is not a monk who enters a monastery, but one who has grown old in a monastery." It's the life that forms us and challenges us through all of the various challenges and temptations. We're formed. By living the life we're called to live, whatever that is that God calls us to, that's where we are formed to be the person God made us to be, with all of our characteristics and preferences and ways of acting and thinking. And when God looks upon us, God says, just as at the time of creation, it is good. We are good. Our call is to use these tools of the spiritual life to grow, and to grow in the reality that we have, each one of us, been created in God's image and likeness. And therefore that final call is about love, and never lose hope in God's mercy. Okay? So, Brenda, how are we doing time-wise? About 2:20, okay. All right. One of the things I was trying to figure out if we, maybe just to encourage you to do on your own, would be to look through this chapter and all these various precepts, because there are a lot of them. But just spend some time reflecting on a couple of them, and how is that practically done today in your own life? That would be something that, or you could do that on your own reflection and perhaps share with one another at some point. Okay? Thank you.